While I consider myself a scholar of medieval magic and have the student loan debt to prove it, I am also very much a monastic historian. I love learning about medieval monastic life. My favorite part of it all is the petty drama that monks and nuns were constantly getting themselves into. There's something so humanizing about supposedly holy men and women struggling with interpersonal relationships, whether that be falling into temptation or fighting over chickens, both of which I will be discussing today. Normally, I study monks, but today I am going to focus on a priory of Cistercian nuns located in the Rouen archdiocese in northern France. Originally, this was going to be an easy video. I try to have videos out every 2 weeks, but obviously in this case I failed. So this was going to be an easy video with me just collecting some monastic drama stories and sharing those. And in a way, it is. In this video, I shall discuss my source and the incidents I will unpack in part 2. Now, back in September, when this video was simply going to be a collection of monastic drama, the first source I looked through was the Register of Uda of Rouen. Bishop and archbishop registers are excellent sources if you want to see what kind of misdeeds medieval people were either accused of doing or actually doing. The Register of Uda of Rouen is filled with extremely interesting tidbits. As a side note, Uda of Rouen is also known as Odo Regard, Odo Regali, and Uda Regali, depending on whether or not the source refers to him by the Latinized version of his name or the French version. Anyway, my intention for this was for it to be an easy video. Find some stories I liked that were a bit scandalous, a bit funny, and tell them. Easy peasy. But then I kept reading about the nuns at St. Aubin Priory, some of whom kept getting pregnant, and wondered why Archbishop Uda of Rouen wasn't really doing anything about it, at least not right away. His register does remark upon one nun, Agnes of Pont, being sent to a leper house as punishment, but not the others, at least not to the same extent. Uda does comment that he took the veil away from 2 nuns for fornicating, not with each other, they were fornicating with men, but they are still mentioned in later entries of the register at St. Aubin's. It actually takes several years for him to finally put his foot down and punish them himself instead of waiting for the prioress to do it. So I was really curious why the punishments weren't as extreme. And so, instead of a quick and easy video about a bunch of medieval monastic scandals, I'll be discussing the many scandals of the Cistercian nuns at St. Aubin's Priory in the Archdiocese of Rouen. In part 2 of these videos, I'll use St. Aubin's Priory as a case study regarding the historical context surrounding the Archdiocese of Rouen in the 13th century. After all, history does not exist in a vacuum. We cannot remotely begin to understand the significance of the lives and scandals of these nuns without exploring the historical context of these lives. Also, if you have anything that particularly interests you that you'd like me to go into a bit more detail about in part 2, please do let me know. A short disclaimer. French is not my native tongue, so while I have looked up how to pronounce the French names and did practice, I may struggle a bit with the pronunciation. I'm terribly sorry in advance. I promise I am trying my best. Additionally, the translation I use refers to money in terms of pounds and shillings. In medieval France, the currency at this time would be livre tourna, livre parisis, livre sous, and dinaros. I do not feel like figuring out what the medieval French currency would be, to translate the pounds to shillings, so I'm just going to refer to financial amounts as my English translation does in English coinage terms. This is so I don't get anything wrong and just for everyone's sake. As always, a link to the bibliography is in the video description down below. The primary source. For my primary source, I use Sidney M. Brown's 1964 translation of the Register of Uda of Rouen. It was edited by Jeremiah Francis O'Sullivan. Uda of Rouen was a 13th century Franciscan friar. In 1248, he became the Archbishop of Rouen and the Archdiocese's first Franciscan archbishop. Now, part of a bishop and archbishop's duties were conducting visitations. However, they only started keeping registers of their visitations in the late 12th and early 13th century. Some of these registers can be really detailed, like the one we are going to see today, or Bishop John Grandison's of Exeter. Others are not particularly long at all. So what is a visitation? Basically, a visitation was when a bishop or archbishop would go around to the parishes and other religious houses in their diocese and check to make sure everything was running smoothly. If it wasn't, he would either make suggestions for his parishioners and clergy to follow or enact punishments himself. Due to the sheer amount of parishes and religious houses they had to visit, the bishop or archbishop often did not have enough time to enforce every reform and suggestion he made. Instead, he had to make do with what he could with the time he had at each location. So, how did visitations work? Well, the visitor, a bishop or archbishop, or one of his house, would tell the person running the monastery, convent, priory, church, etc., whether it be an abbot, abbess, prior, prioress, etc., approximately when to expect his arrival. That way, they knew when the bishop or archbishop would show up, and the superior of the monastic house would know to be in attendance. It's also important to note that the superior of the house was in charge of their monastics community's spiritual and physical well-being, so only they could answer the questions regarding the house's overall well-being to the extent that the visitor needed. Jeremiah Francis O'Sullivan explains how the visitation should work. Quote, "On arrival, the visitor was met in procession by the community at large. After this formal reception, the visitor met the visitans in chapter and preached a sermon. Then began the visitation proper." Unquote. Eudes probably asked a set of questions that would provide him with answers about the house. The visitation occurred in the chapter house, and people were questioned openly there. O'Sullivan goes on to explain that, quote, "The whole community was examined openly in chapter. The questions turned on the observance of the rule and its observation, the Opus Dei, the upkeep of the church and its ornamenta, that is, the fabric of the church, its vestments, chalices, altar cloths, and the morality of the community at large. The visitor then called the members of the house singly and in private if he felt the open inquiry was not altogether satisfactory. Thus he had two types of information, the detecta, or things revealed openly by the community, and the comperta, the things found out by the visitor on examining the individuals. If necessary, he then proceeded to the matter of correction by order, injunction, or compurgation." Unquote. Orders were given right then and there, and were considered canonically binding. They often related to things that were already mentioned in the monastic rules, like eating meat. O'Sullivan points out that they were, quote, "to be obeyed by virtue of the rule of obedience," unquote. With injunctions, they were also very binding, but usually given in writing with the visitor's seal. Injunctions were in writing so they could be used for reference during future visitations. Finally, a compurgation was when one of the monastics were accused of a crime or a grave fault, the most severe of all the faults, and needed to prove their innocence. To do this, they would get witnesses who were in the same level of the church as they were and confirm the accused was honest. After dealing with spiritual matters, the visitor then investigated the material and financial aspects of the community and whether or not all of their buildings were in acceptable condition. Now, you might be thinking, didn't people have to obey the church in medieval Europe? Well, the answer is, in theory, yes. In reality, sometimes. The medieval Catholic Church, while extremely powerful, did not have as much control over the population as they would have liked. Visitation records are one excellent source of how much and how little power and influence the clergy had over the people. As we'll see shortly, it seemed like Uda of Rouen had less control over this particular nunnery than he wanted. Uda visited St. Aubin's Priory 13 times between 1251 and 1268. During 1251 and 1268, St. Aubin's Priory underwent 14 visitations, one visitation occurring on August 22nd, 1263, was carried out by the Archbishop's brother, Adam, who was also a Franciscan friar. The first documented visit was on August 7th, 1251. The priory had 14 nuns, and Uda found that the priory received nuns simoniacally. From this point onwards, Uda forbids them from accepting any more nuns unless they receive his permission. He also forbids the nuns from receiving gifts from their friends without the prioress's approval. The nuns also chant the daily hours without modulation, and he asks them to at least chant with low modulation. Finally, the priory owes 100 shillings. The second visit occurred on September 4th, 1252. They now have 13 nuns. Uda forbids them from eating meat, especially in front of the laity. He also forbids them from eating with relatives or others, presumably he is referring to other laity, alone. If they want to do so, the prioress or sub-prioress must chaperone. They had a good harvest, and they do not have a treasurer. Also, they owe 20 pounds. Shillings were less than pounds, so their debt has basically doubled since the last visitation. The third visit occurred on February 25th, 1254. Now, here we do have a little bit of drama, which we're going to get into in a bit. There are now 15 nuns at St. Aubin's. Uda forbids them from accepting any more nuns without his permission due to the priory's poverty. After all, more nuns means more mouths to feed and bodies to clothe. He orders that they all need to wear the same style of scapular. It's a bit like an apron. Uda tells the prioress that when the novices turn 14, they need to take vows of obedience, chastity, and poverty. And if they aren't willing to do so, then they are to be returned home. She is also to do this with the women who are already nuns. I am guessing Uda did this to try to get the nuns' numbers down so they could have a better chance of getting out of poverty, but I don't have any proof for that. That's just my theory. Also, the nuns' relatives are not allowed to stay at the priory overnight. The relatives aren't allowed to eat or drink at the priory, but if it does happen, the nuns are not allowed to eat and drink with them. The nuns need a chaplain, and they owe 30 pounds. The debt they have keeps going up. Now it's time for the drama. Two nuns, Agnes of Pont and Petronella, are not talking to each other. We don't get any detail as to why, but Udas calls Agnes of Pont quarrelsome and a sower of discord, unquote. And if she can't, quote, to put aside her hatred for Petronella and to amend her ways in certain other respects, unquote, then she is to be removed from the community. From this, we can see that Agnes is a known troublemaker. Agnes and Petronilla aren't the only named nuns in this entry. Alice of Rouen is documented to have broken her vow of chastity with a priest from Beauvais. Alice and the priest had a child together, and the cellaress, Richelde, is to be removed from the office of cellarer. Remember some of these women's names, they come up again in later entries. The fourth visit occurred on July 23rd, 1256. We also get some follow-up on Agnes of Pont later in the entry. Right now there are 15 nuns. They still do not chant the divine hours with modulation. They have no priest for their parish. Uda reminds them not to allow relatives to stay the night or to take in any more nuns without his permission. As a side note, the repetition of these rules don't necessarily mean that the nuns of St. Aubin's are breaking them. Uda could have been reminding them of the restriction he previously imposed on the community. Also, they now owe 40 pounds. As for the scandals, two nuns, Alice of Rouen and Eustasia of Etrupen, have been found to be breaking their vows of chastity, and Uda takes their veils away. He does not seem to fully kick them out of the community, as they're both mentioned still at the priory in later entries. Uda removed the prioress from office and suspended the sub-prioress Anastasia's punishment until they have a new prioress. Anastasia was, quote, ill-famed of incontinence, unquote. Incontinence in the religious context refers to breaking a vow of chastity. It's important to note that being ill-famed for something in the registers does not necessarily mean you are guilty of doing that thing. What it does mean is that there are rumors flying around and people are gossiping regarding your reputation. And as a side note, fama was a big thing. Fama being your reputation was a big thing in the Middle Ages, but we don't have time to go into that. Now, Agnes of Pont. Oh boy. Well, she certainly did not reform her ways. Instead, she, quote, had connived at Eustasia's fornication, and indeed had even arranged it, as the rumor goes. Further, she gave the said Eustacia, as report has it, some herbs to drink in order to kill the child already conceived within the said Eustacia, unquote. As punishment, Agnes was sent to the leper house at Rouen. The fifth visit occurred on August 7th, 1257. Again, Uda reminds them not to take in any more nuns and forbade the nuns' relatives from staying over or dining with them. The priory officially had 15 nuns, but only 12 nuns were in residence. This is because Eustacia of Entrepay left. She was also pregnant when she left, and rumor had it she gave birth to her baby. The baby's father was said to be a chaplain named John who worked at Fry. Also, Alice of Rouen was in grave fault. The nuns' parish now had a priest who says mass for them. Udas tells them to hire a clerk to assist the priest and to do this before the feast of St. Remy. The nuns now owe £1,000, which is a dramatic increase from the £40 the year previously. The sixth visit occurred on September 17th, 1258. This entry is, not gonna lie, pretty boring. There are 15 nuns, they have a priest, and Uda reminds them about not taking any more nuns and the restriction on guests. They seem to be doing relatively fine. Now, the seventh visit occurred on March 5th, 1259. Another entry filled with some drama. But first, let's go over the boring stuff. The nuns still have a priest, and they're in debt. But there are now 16 nuns instead of 15. This section is particularly interesting in terms of 13th century Simonatical entry reform, which I will be discussing in part 2 detail. So I will be quoting it here. Quote, 16 nuns were there. The prioress was away. At our last visitation, we forbade them to receive or give the veil to anyone without our special mandate. However, despite our command, they received a nun and bestowed the veil upon a certain girl, to wit, the daughter of Sir Robert, called Malvosian Knight. When we asked them why they had presumed to do this, they replied that urgent necessity and poverty had so compelled them, and that in consideration of their consent, the father of this girl had given and endowed them with an annual income of 100 shillings, and they had a letter to prove this. They added that they had done this without the consent or wish of the prioress. We, realizing and considering that they had not done this without the vice of greed and of depraved simony, subsequently ordered that the Dean of Bray, by letter patent, to admonish, as the law requires, the said nuns to remove this girl from their house before Ascension Day, and having taken away the veil from her, to return her to her father's house. Upon the prioress we adjoined and caused to have enjoined a penance which seemed expedient, because she had allowed such a crime, and likewise upon the nuns for their boldness in undertaking such a matter. Unquote. The eighth visit occurred on October 1st, 1261. It's another exciting entry. The priory had 14 nuns and 1 lay sister. Uda reminds them about not taking in new nuns. Uda also tells them that they must confess and receive communion 7 times a year, and he does not care if they don't have wine after receiving communion. This is not an acceptable excuse. Furthermore, they must prepare themselves to receive communion with due diligence, and if a nun skips communion, it is a grave fault, unless she has a justified absence. Also, Alice of Rouen, who was mentioned in 1254, 1256, and 1257, has broken her vow of chastity again and has had another baby. Uda notes that the rumor is that Alice has had 3 children on 3 separate occasions. Additionally, Beatrice of Beauvais has had a child, and the father is rumored to be the Dean of St. Quentin, which was a diocese in Beauvais. Both Alice and Beatrice are in grave fault and have undergone penances as per the rule of the Cistercian order. Uda then forbids them to eat at their priest's house. Perhaps this is the place the nuns keep meeting the clergy they are either sleeping with or are seduced by. It's not specified. And they are forbidden from taking in any children. This could refer to their own children or local children to be taught. Teaching local children was a way for nuns to make money. Uda also forbids junior nuns from leaving the priory for any reason, including what he refers to as gainful purposes, presumably to make some sort of money for their priory. He notes that they have few provisions. The 9th visit occurred on August 22nd, 1263. By this time, it's by Uda's brother, Adam. The prioress is not there, but 11 nuns were. And things are actually looking up a little bit for the nuns this time. They only owe a tithe to the king, and everything else seems to be in working order. The 10th visit occurred on October 1st, 1263. Well, things have either gone downhill rapidly or they lied to Adam, because the prioress is the one who is supposed to talk with the ecclesiastical visitors. Adam couldn't get the full story in August. But now, 11 nuns were there. Two had left to go find alms. Alice of Rouen and Beatrice of Beauvais have left the priory at what Uda calls the frivolry of soul and at the devil's instigation. Uda clearly decides that enough was enough with both of them and says if they come back, they can only be readmitted with his permission. Clearly, the monastic life was not compatible with Alice, who, as you remember, apparently keeps getting pregnant. Also, they now owe £20, and Uda reminds them not to take in any more nuns without his permission. The 11th visit occurred on October 18th, 1264. 12 nuns were currently at the priory. At Uda's visitation, the prioress was sick and unable to see him, so he commented that he was not able to get the full picture. However, what he did manage to find out was pretty bad. Beatrice of Beauvais is still wandering, and the rumor is she has had several children. Also, the buildings are in desperate need of repair. The roof of the monastery leaks when it's rainy, to the point that the nuns cannot stay there when it does rain. Because of this, they are constantly getting sick and aren't able to chant the divine hours, especially matins. The 12th visit occurred on July 30th, 1266. They have 13 nuns and don't chant their hours with modulation on non-feast days, but they do chant them with modulation during Advent and Lent, so this is kind of an improvement. Again, Uda reminds the prioress not to take in new nuns. They have 2 female servants, one of whom is rumored to be sleeping around. Uda expels and sends her away from the priory. Wicheld, who is cellarist again, is forbidden from letting servants eat in the kitchen again. A local miller keeps coming to the priory. However, he has a bad reputation and is said to be, quote, a man of depraved conduct, unquote. So he's no longer allowed near the priory. Also, the master of the school at Beauvoir had bad behavior the several times he visited, which resulted in an unspecified evil, so the Dean of Bray is to warn him about this. Again, what either man did is not specified in the register, so we can only imagine what they are rumored to have done or did do. I'm going to quote this next part about the chickens, as I find this tidbit quite interesting. Quote, item, because of several of them had their own hens and chickens, they are often quarreling. We ordered them to feed all the hens and chickens together and to possess them in common. We ordered that such eggs as might be produced be served equally to the nuns, and that occasionally, when it seemed best, some of the chickens be served to the sick. Unquote. The 13th visit occurred on September 9th, 1267. They have 13 nuns. 3 of them are at the vineyards. Uda is still reminding them they are not allowed to take in any more nuns. They owe £30. Anastasia, the sub-prioress, has quit being sub-prioress, but because she did not receive permission to do so, Uda gives her an unspecified penance and makes her the sub-prioress again. Wicheld the cellarist has been removed from office due to unspecified bad conduct. 2 men, a rector and a cleric, keep visiting the priory, quote, to the point of scandal, unquote, and now the nuns are to keep them away as much as they possibly can. Also, a miller, perhaps the one in the last entry, is no longer allowed at the priory at all, and the nuns have not started sharing the chickens like Uda told them to do the last time. And finally, we have our last entry. The last visit occurred on February 18th, 1268. I'm just going to read this one out in full because, quite frankly, I am sick of summarizing each entry, so here we go. Quote, with God's grace, we visited the priory of nuns at St. Aubin, where there were, lacuna in MS, nuns. We punished Anastasia, a former sub-prioress, for having given up her office of sub-prioress on her own authority and against the wish of the prioress. We also deemed Eunastasia and Margaret disobedient for that, to wit, they had been unwilling to receive or undertake the said office at the command of the prioress, and therefore we punished them as seemed expedient to us. They owed £8, 10 shillings, and they had few or no supplies. Unquote. All right, and that is part 1 of this video about St. Aubin's Priory. Part 2 will be posted as soon as possible. I might make another video about something else. I'm actually really excited because I've been going to the archives to look at Devon folklore, but I'm not sure if that will be in my next video or if part 2 of this series will be. Either way, the next video will be posted as soon as possible. And again, if you have anything that particularly interests you that you'd like me to go into more detail about in part 2, please do let me know. Right now, the plan is to discuss the historical context surrounding Cistercian nuns, simony, monastic finances, personal possessions, and wandering monastics. I might also discuss the historical context surrounding chastity and medieval abortion, but that will depend on how far in depth I decide to go. I might put that section of the video up on Patreon, I don't know. Speaking of Patreon, I would like to thank my patrons, Mateus and Carl, over on Patreon for their support. If you are interested in becoming a patron, please do check out my Patreon. Paid members get to see early versions of scripts, works in progress of my web novels, discussions of what I'm researching, the occasional art piece. Sometimes I post travel photos. I try to post at least one thing every month, ideally more. Tiers start at $1 a month, and everything is accessible even at the lowest tier. And also every bit of support really helps me be able to do my research and make these videos and such. And as we are in the shameless self-promotion section, December 7th is the first anniversary of my novel, Decessit Vita Matris. It will be out for a year at that point, which I think is very exciting. So if you're excited about reading a novel about monks, knights, and demons set in the 13th century in Devon, Decessit Vita Matris is available on sale on Itch.io, Amazon, and through order at your local bookstore. Currently, the ebook is for sale for 99 cents on Amazon and $1.99 on Itch.io. However, I do recommend that people get the physical book just because the novel does have some dark themes in it and is increasingly being censored on Itch.io, for example. And also, if you own the physical book, you can own it forever. Amazon or what have you cannot take it away from you. So again, if you have any suggestions for topics you would like to see me talk about, or rather hear me talk about after part 2, please do let me know in the comments. Also, if you enjoyed this video, want to see more like it, please do like and subscribe to my channel, blah, blah, blah. You know how it goes. So thank you for sticking around to this point, and I look forward to putting out part 2. Have a good day, and goodbye until next time.